And according to our data, he is counseling Zelensky, indicating that Zelensky must stand on his positions and that he must not make any concessions. They're saying that Kiev may not make any concessions, especially territorial concessions, and that it may not show any flexibility. As a very positive contribution, which ultimately allowed the Global South to strengthen its position at the Global Forum and help establish a more equal global order, fundamentally relying on the sovereign equality of states and all the other principles reflected in the UN Charter in their entirety and interconnectedness. So, in general, we are very happy with this process. There are still differences, but that is often a useful thing, and I believe that Johannesburg has managed to create a positive momentum for the G20 and to focus everyone's attention on the issues of Africa and other countries of the Global South. So, on the whole, that is a very positive step in the preparation for the G20 summit, which will happen in Johannesburg in November 2025. You said that the G20 is an economic association, first of all. However, South Africa, in beginning its chairmanship, set a goal of achieving a G20 consensus on the Ukraine crisis. How successful has this effort been so far, and given the diverse membership of the G20, is such consensus possible? Well, I am not aware of South Africa setting such a goal. I was following closely. I followed them assuming their presidency, and I watched the Sherpas work. They didn't have such a goal. I had a lengthy talk to the foreign minister, and I had a talk with President Ramaphosa, and they confirmed that they support the need to abide by the original mandate of the G20: trade, finance, logistics, transport, and related issues. So I have not seen, and my colleagues who worked to prepare the ministerial meeting have not seen such a trend. Mr. Lavrov, the United States avoided high-level participation in the Johannesburg meeting, and they undermined previous meetings while trying to force the Ukraine agenda. So how do you think can the EU's disruptive influence be addressed, and does the G20 have a future? Well, as you mentioned, the previous meetings have been undermined by the West by trying to Ukrainize the agenda. I wouldn't say that's a fair assessment. The previous attempts by the West to Ukrainize the G20 were undermined by the other participants of this association. And if you look at the outcome documents, after a compromise was reached between all the participants of the G20 to include a small segment on geopolitical issues, you won't find anything there that the Russian Federation would reject. It says, in the last year and the year before that, it just says that there's a large number of problems, such as the Palestinian problem and what's happening in Gaza and the Middle East in general. But in order to come to an agreement on including this language, these small paragraphs, our experts had to spend a lot of time. And influence on the Palestinian or Ukrainian conflict, there is none. It does not have any influence because there are relevant formats to address these crisis situations. But still, even this language included in the G20 leaders' declarations have not shifted the essence of the economic discussions, which ultimately are beneficial for the shaping of the global multipolar order. The aggressive global minority seems to be getting smaller, yet no less aggressive. Statements from Macron, Callas, Scholz, and others grow increasingly tragicomic. What do you think drives them, and what are they trying to achieve? Well, this is something that has surprised me too. Kaja Kallas spoke here at the G20 with the same series of accusations, proclaiming some plans which would not allow Russia to take its due place in the world. I do believe there is a tragicomic element in all of that. I would also note her statements about the Riyadh meeting between Russia and the US, when she said that the TV picture where the Russian Foreign Minister, the US State Secretary, and the national security advisors from Moscow and Washington created an image for the world that Russia is a winner. So this mentality has not gone anywhere. Since the Soviet Union fell apart and we had to rebuild relations with the European part of Eurasia, it was always either or. Either you're with us or you're against us. That was their attitude. So since the first time of the Ukrainian conflict, from the coup in Ukraine, which we believe wasn't part of the West's systemic policy, but which was part of its policy, but the problems have risen from that time. So when the United States pressured the Supreme Court to reject Yanukovych's victory in the second round of elections and appointed, I believe that was the Constitutional Court, and it appointed and mandated a third round of elections, which was not provided for by the Constitution, and it was an unprecedented manipulation. This led to the victory of Yushchenko. And before that third round of elections took part, Belgium's foreign minister said publicly that he calls on Ukrainian voters to make the right choice. Either they're with Russia or they're with Europe. So that confrontational spirit has not gone anywhere. And what is behind that spirit is the unwillingness to loosen the grip and to let anyone stray away from the rule of the Western countries. They have been trying to do that in all parts of the world and on the post-Soviet space too. And the people who are now trying to voice assessments about Western countries and who are trying to maintain unity of the Western countries, I cannot but mention Mr. Rutte, who is speaking as if he's the head of a powerful state and not just an official, who is obligated to reflect the consensus of all their members. He's touring around NATO countries' capitals, demanding to prevent a peace settlement that would be beneficial for Russia in any way. And according to our data, he is counseling Zelensky, indicating that Zelensky must stand on his positions and that he must not make any concessions. They're saying that Kiev may not make any concessions, especially territorial concessions, and that it may not show any flexibility. That's what they're doing. So certainly this person, Rutte, is abusing his position. And we know for a fact that not all members of NATO are taking such a rabid position. We know that not all of them really want to continue spending all their money on Ukraine and subjugating the entire work of NATO and the European Union to Zelensky's whims. But truth will ultimately prevail. There are now increasingly reasonable voices in European countries and in Washington, and we had a detailed account of our talks. The President has talked on this subject several times. The thing is not about making concessions. It's not about us making concessions to them or them conceding something to us. It's not a zero-sum game. Politics and diplomacy is, first of all, a dialogue. It's about listening and hearing the other party and the desire to find common ground, finding a place where your interests come together. And so you may find consensus on individual issues. It doesn't mean that differences will disappear completely. But you may obtain practical results, including in the economy. And where you have differences, you can prevent those differences from escalating to a conflict, especially an armed conflict. And how have your G20 colleagues from friendly countries responded to the renewal of Russian-American dialogue? And how can this impact the development of multipolarity? There has been a very positive response from everyone to that meeting. They all understand that it's not the end of the Russia-West confrontation, but the fact that the dialogue has renewed is a sign of going back to normal, and that is something that everyone recognizes. The meeting in Riyadh got a tragicomic response from those characters you mentioned, the heads of Brussels bureaucracy and NATO, and that is very telling. The very fact that representatives of two great powers sat down at the negotiating table and told each other what they think is seen as a betrayal of the West. That is not healthy. Those people are not healthy. And most of the people that we have talked to, people from the global majority, share that view, even though not all of them are saying that directly, but that is my feeling. The UN General Assembly draft resolution prepared for February 24th by Britain, France, Germany, the Baltic states and other European countries demand that Moscow immediately and unconditionally withdraws from Ukraine. And for the first time since the operation began, the US isn't co-sponsoring such Ukraine resolution. Do you think this is a sign that the Russian-American relations are warming? This indicates a pragmatism on the part of Donald Trump's administration. That is the essence of their policy. When meeting the leaders of some countries, including Prime Minister of India, Narendra Modi, but probably while meeting other heads of government as well, he emphasized that he is guided by common sense. And I believe that is what has led to the change in the list of co-sponsors of that dead-end resolution that you mentioned. What issues is the Russian Foreign Ministry working on in preparation for a potential meeting between Presidents Putin and Trump, and when might such a meeting take place? When it takes place, you will certainly know. As to the issues that we're working on, that is, of course, confidential. It's a key part of any diplomatic process. But I'm sure that we will provide information in due course, and the press service of the Kremlin will certainly be the first to brief you. U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent has suggested the possibility of discussing sanctions relief for Russia as a part of a Ukraine crisis negotiations. What is Russia's position on this issue? And if there were such a discussion about the crisis resolutions, where? Well, is it possible to achieve a resolution without a comprehensive settlement on sanctions? Well, we have not touched on this topic. We believe it is a grave violation of all the principles that the West put at the foundation of the global economy: fair competition, private property, the presumption of innocence, and all the free market mechanisms. That all of that was thrown down. And we can also add direct theft of Russian assets. It is a shameful thing to mention. They didn't just steal the assets, but they're also using the revenue from those assets to fund the Ukraine war. Recently, there have been reports that some Western countries are willing to go back to Russia and resume their operations. I believe that our economic agencies have had a very proper response. Over the years of this hybrid war, including the illegitimate sanctions, we have made many steps to provide a powerful momentum to the development of our own sectors and industries which used to be reliant on the United States and the European Union until recently. And this new state has enabled us to realize how beneficial it is for our economy to develop our own technologies, which in some cases are already better than the Western ones. Now, I think this is the kind of logic that we must be guided by when we're talking about this. So we must not talk about the Western companies coming back to Russia, even though they must not be dissuaded from that, but they should be let come back to sectors which will not create threats to the Russian economy, in case someone decides that we must be punished again. The sanctions have taught us and have forced us in many respects and have actually inspired us to conduct deep reforms of our economy in the interests of a fully fledged and sovereign development, independent of the whims of those who believe themselves to still be the king of the hill and the rulers of the global economy. So, as I've said, multipolarity is gaining strength, and there is an increasing momentum in the economic and political and financial sphere, and all of this means that the multipolarity that is taking shape is unstoppable. And so the G20 is keeping its role, and its participants must realize that this process is inevitable, and they must be part of this process. Multipolarity does not include the West. The West is part of the planet, a part of the economic life of the planet. And the G20 is a platform for education for our Western colleagues as well. Thank you.
Don't miss out. Log on to oneindia.com for more updates.